The Biden administration just signed off on the latest arms sales to Taiwan, with the latest two totaling $428 million US. This also marks the seventh arms sales to Taiwan since President Biden took office. The U.S. has provided Taiwan with spare parts for various types of fighter jets, other planes, and air weapons systems. In the past 6 arms sales, most of the items were comprised of parts for warships, tanks, and other items related to maintenance and technical upgrades of existing articles. Taiwan-U.S. relations are guided by the U.S. Taiwan Relations Act, passed by Congress and signed into law by President Jimmy Carter in 1979, which requires the U.S. to sell arms to Taiwan for its own self-defense. We will take a deep dive today at how U.S. arms sales helps Taiwan boost its self-defense capabilities.
And also, in addition to the 7 arms sales, the U.S. House of Representatives just passed U.S. $10 billion in military aid to Taiwan over 5 years. So we will also look at how these continuous moves to support Taiwan will affect the Taiwan-U.S.-China relationship. Hi, and everyone. Welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Gladys.
I'm Rath Wang.
So today we have 2 guests joining us in the studio. First, we'd like to introduce Alexander Huang, KMT's International Affairs Director and representative to the U.S. former Taiwan Mainland Affairs Deputy Minister. He is also an International Affairs Professor at Taiwan University. And also we have Chen Fang-yu, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Soochow University, who was a visiting research fellow at George Washington University and the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington, D.C. Both of them are experts in Taiwan-U.S. relations and the region's geopolitics. Welcome to the show.
We will also hear from Su Tzu-yun, Research Fellow at the Director at the Division of Defense Strategy for the Institute for National Defense and Security Research. Su spoke earlier to our Taiwan Talks reporter Irene Cho on the substantial implications this 7th Biden arms sales has on Taiwan. Let's now start off today's discussion by digging into the details of this $428 million US arms sales. My first question goes to you, Alex. This $428 million US arms sale is Biden's 7th in 2 years. The U.S. has reiterated that its arms sales is to enhance Taiwan's security and maintain peace across the Taiwan Strait. Tensions between the U.S. and China also seem to have somewhat subdued since President Xi met with President Biden in Bali. However, many analysts say that this is just merely a ceasefire because the competition is still running at full speed. How do you interpret this current diplomatic feud between the two countries?
I think that most of the people would agree that the strategic competition between the United States and China will be a long-term one. Some people say it will go for 15, 20, 30 years. So with a long-lasting strategic competition, there are probably periodically that they need to, lower the tension.
And you feel
between the two.
Tensions.
Right now, I think as the Asia Czar of the White House, Dr. Campbell said that for the near term, that they wanted to have a more, mild relationship for the time being. So personally, I would say this is a short-term move from both sides. That China wanted to lower the tension, and the United States, and even more, wanted to maintain the peace and stability for the short term, because probably based on their intel analysis or based on their own, military modernization program. So both powers decided that this is a time to de-escalate the tension.
Okay, but do you think what effects would it be on Taiwan's defense strategy or policies? Would it make any changes?
Well, when the big powers try to de-escalate or lower the tension, reduce the probability of risk, that means there is a potential danger. So I do not see a kind of, slowdown of the U.S.-China competition for a short term means that Taiwan's situation is getting better. On contrast, I would see that probably Washington sees that there is a potential danger in the near future, so they need to, in the name of peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait, they need to
But you feel that they'll
de-escalate.
eventually collide. You feel the U.S. and China will collide in the Taiwan Strait.
Well, it depends on how the collision will look like, but the competition is there for sure.
And Fang-yu, you've just been to Washington, D.C. What did you hear there? Any discussion about the national defense or policy or even the arms sales to Taiwan?
Well, I think the U.S. and Taiwan's cooperation is always very close,
Right.
and we see a series of policies and also the acts discussed in the Congress. So there have been always much of the cooperations going on. So I think there's a continuation of the U.S. policy toward Taiwan. Also, Taiwan's plans to cooperate with the U.S. to strengthening our own defense. So I think there's no much change, I mean, in the long run. So I think this is the U.S. and China competition is a structural one. So there will be a high level of continuation as we see.
Right. So actually, in the same week, at the arms sales, the U.S. House of Representatives just passed a 5-year military aid of up to 10 billion U.S. annually to Taiwan. Any further discussion in between?
Well, it's
Right.
pretty dramatic because first, about 5 months ago, we heard the number is about 4.5 billion, and then
it goes up to 10 billion.
when the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee passed the bill, that was 6.5 billion, and right now it's 10.
Right.
But I have to say that I think most of the viewers, especially in the United States, must understand that when Congress authorized a chunk of budget, it doesn't mean that later on, in reality, that they can actually budget or appropriate that money. So the 10 billion is the target. The Congress will work with the executive branch and they will negotiate, and also the Congress will look at their own pocket and see that how much, even though authorized up to 10 billion, it doesn't mean that it will be 10 billion or 2 billion each year for Taiwan.
Do you feel that amount will go up if the tensions rise? Say
Well,
China
of course,
becomes more aggressive.
Ukraine, that they can add more aid to Ukraine. They did. And if there is a scenario, I believe that the United States will do the same to Taiwan. But again, it's authorization, appropriation, and deliverables. And deliverables depends on the production line and backlog. So there are a lot of issues involved. It's not an easy business, but we must appreciate the goodwill and care of the United States.
Because if we examine closely the number, like we said, 10 billion, if we say it's like a support or donation, which words you want to say?
They use the term grant.
Right, so it's actually similar to what the U.S. provided to Ukraine against Russia. Do you think it will lead to precedents of over-resilience of U.S. support for Taiwan self-defense? Like, would it be getting higher risk or any risk in Taiwan?
I think it's a sign that the U.S. and Taiwan are cooperating with each other and even more closely.
Right.
And I think it sends a very clear signal to the dictator, especially, to China, that
like we already put the number.
Yeah, we are preparing for a potential conflict. Okay. And I think that is an important way to show that if the dictator wants to use force, then it will be highly costly for them. So in the long term, we see that according to the Taiwan Relations Act, the U.S. has the obligation to maintain peace and stability in not only Taiwan, but also the Western Pacific. So this is a long-term target of the U.S. In the short term, we see that the U.S. is maybe the U.S. and Taiwan are learning lessons from Ukraine. That we will see that we need more direct and to speed up a quicker project and approaches to prepare for a potential conflict. So, I mean, the stockpiles are important because it will deplete very quickly. So, in the act, that there's also approaches to speed up to prepare for the stockpiles in Taiwan, not only for the $10 billion. Yeah. So I think this is a very important cooperation between U.S. and Taiwan.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the specifics of this arms sales, Alex. There seems to be that, all these arms sales that we've seen in the past year-ish too, a lot of them are actually comprised of spare parts of F-16s and some parts for Taiwan's indigenous Jingguo fighter jets, and where every country in Asia, a U.S. ally, uses C-130 transport jets. And with all of that, how do you see this in terms of coming to Taiwan's self-defense? Does this actually beef our self-defense, or do you feel that the U.S. could actually escalate or actually enhance its current strategy? Because there have been voices saying that 100 of the most advanced Patriot anti-aircraft missiles could be added in the near future.
Right. I think I would put the Patriot system in another category. But in the past several arms sales decisions, most of the items were parts and services that enhance Taiwan's maintenance and warfighting capability and endurance. The reason why is that, in the old time, we always look at the systems, so, platforms. But in the Biden administration, the arms sales decision were focused on asymmetric capability, or at least maintaining the current warfighting capability. Everybody knows that, the amateurs will always talk about strategy, but the specialists understand that logistics is the key to fight and win. So we are talking about, the inventory that we need to store, and also we need to make our serviceability or availability, which means that we will have, we need to raise the ratio of serviceability. So our airplane, our warships, because of the tempo of their combat air patrol has been increased sharply, which means that not only the pilot, but also metal would get fatigued.
The actual parts that...
Right, so we need to replace the parts more often than normal peacetime, given the fact. So the United States is trying to do some substantial help to Taiwan so we can maintain the tempo and the warfighting capability.
But is it sufficient for the PLA? Since the PLA is rapidly modernizing, they're increasing their capabilities and all that, and are we doing the same thing, or do you feel that there's still a gap in that area?
Of course there is a gap. I mean, PLA has a far more larger arsenal and system available than us. Right. But in terms of operations, we need to understand that Taiwan area is not really big. You cannot put 1,000 fighter jets in one airspace because they cannot fight. So there are thresholds. And under the threshold, we need to maintain our tempo. And the tempo is supported by serviceability, which means that we will have available fighters and warships that operational.
Which this arms sales does. It increases serviceability.
To keep our existing systems operational and functional.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the policy side actually. So we have seen the amount of arms sales to Taiwan by successive U.S. president, and actually give you the number that this hit a record of U.S. 18 billion during Donald Trump's 4-year presidency, which surpassed both Bush Jr. and also Barack Obama. So actually the question goes to Fang-yu. Do you see, if we examine the total number or the amount of arms sales under each U.S. president, is this an indicator to the U.S. president's policy toward China? Are they pro or against China? What do you see their connection?
Well, I will say the answer is yes and no. So in the sense of yes, from the Taiwan's perspective, yeah, we need more. The more, the better, right? So we need more arms sales, and we need to upgrade our weapon system. We need to increase our stockpile. So we need many things. So if the U.S. has more arms sales to Taiwan, then it shows up a better or heated up Taiwan and the U.S. Relationship. However, I prefer to say that that is not a direct indicator for a pro or tougher policy on China.
It would be too simple, right?
Yeah, because I prefer to say that it all depends on China's stance. So according to declassified President Reagan's secret memo dated back to 1982, that is declassified by John Bolton in 2019, the then National Security Advisor. So let me quote that. Reagan emphasized that it is essential that the quantity and the quality of the arms provided to Taiwan be conditioned entirely on the threat posed by the PRC. So both in quantitative and qualitative terms, Taiwan's defense capability relative to that of the PRC will be maintained, end quote. So the U.S. arms sales and the policies toward Taiwan is highly dependent on how China poses the threat to the region. Mm-hmm. So that is not depends on the U.S. So the pro or tougher policy on China, but it's a reaction by the U.S. to maintain peace in this region.
Yeah, I would say maybe. Alexander, will you agree that they actually escalate after CCP's 20th National Congress, that actually we are projecting next 5 years of alarming period? Would you say that?
I mean, the situation has been evolving for some time already.
Right.
We have seen under President Obama's term, we had, pivot to Asia rebalance, and then Donald Trump for Indo-Pacific strategy, especially since spring of 2018, when the trade war started, when the United States and China fall into a possible Thucydides trap. And then, so we see that the increase of the United States arms sales items or amount to Taiwan. I think, based on the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, that the United States and Congress, the President and the Congress will assess the security environment of Taiwan and make decisions. The decision, according to the law, was made by the United States. And so they will measure and assess what would be the need for Taiwan, and including articles and services. Mm-hmm. So I would say that it's a counterweight, counterbalance, as Fang-yu said, yes and no. It depends on it's conditioned. So when the China threat is increasing, I think the United States will respond.
Right.
So that means during Trump's presidency, that was when the threat was at the highest. It started because the strategic competition began.
Right.
Yeah. We just discussed what U.S. arms sales to Taiwan means for Taiwan-U.S.-China relations as U.S. and China competition intensifies. Let's now hear from Su Tzu-yun, research fellow and director at the Division of Defense Strategy of the Institute for National Defense and Security Research. Su spoke to Taiwan Talks reporter Irene Cho about what the 7th Arms Sales Package translates to in terms of Taiwan's defense capabilities. Let's take a look.
The Biden administration has approved 7 arms sales worth over $2.7 billion. However, they are mostly parts or technical services. How functional are American arms sales in improving Taiwan's defense capabilities? And what weapons or systems does Taiwan currently lack and urgently require from the United States?
从军售内容来看的话，大部分是属于这个空军战机的零组件，还有海军的这个零组件的一个补充，就是让它的库存可以更为完整。那第二个就是关于爱国者飞弹的技术服务或者是国际的一个合作。 那我想就是这最重要是让台湾可以在面对中国这种就是灰色地带行动的时候，可以有更充足的后勤的这个补给零件因为库存是未来面对军事威胁很重要的一个区块。IESP 就是 International Engineering Service Program 意思就是说让台湾可以跟其他操作爱国者飞弹的国家可以共享情报那这样子就是等于是台北跟华盛顿这种安全的合作，可以对于侵略者就传递一个就是明确的讯号，也就是台湾海峡的安全跟和平是不容这种武力去改变现状的。
The U.S. House of Representatives recently passed the NDAA, a defense bill approving $10 billion in military aid over 5 years to Taiwan. In the past, the U.S. has provided unconditional military packages to Ukraine and Israel. How would direct military aid benefit Taiwan? And moreover, what is rationality behind providing Taiwan with U.S. military aid? Is it possible that Taiwan could become over-dependent on the U.S. due to that?
这100亿美元对台湾的军事援助，当然就是可以快速增加台湾的不对称作战能力，在美国跟国会支持之外，可以作为一个就是双方对话的一个项目。那当然最重要的就是无论就是其他国家如何协助台湾，台湾就是要有展现自我防卫的决心跟意志。在这种情况下，我想是最为重要的。
So that actually show we have the capability to defend ourselves.
台湾的生存不仅是自己的国家利益，也可以对区域安全做出贡献。毕竟依照联合国的统计，大概印太区域就是占了全球航运的60%。那即使是欧洲跟东北亚的航运，也占了全球航运的26%。所以台湾的这个自我防卫具有高度的就是战略意义。
Next year, Taiwan's reservist co-op system will co-op to 22,000 people. Moreover, the number of participants in the 14-day mobilization program will increase by about 7,000. While more reservists are mobilized, what kind of training should the Army enhance to improve our defense capabilities?
所以它是让这些后备军人就是可以重新熟悉他的战斗技巧，还有就是武器操作。那在必要的时候就可以有一个更为完整的后备军。那第二个就是台湾也考虑就是增加这个义务役的这个役期也就是在评估从4个月增加到1年因为中共的威胁现在变得比较明确而且立即所以在这种情况下这个动员的机制就变成台湾增加国防韧性的一个很重要的一个依据。
So is the 14 days of training is long enough?
这是14天应该是足够的。事实上从我们的研究来看的话也有更短的，比如说韩国它的这个就是后备军人的训练只有2天。最重要的就不是天数而是训练的内容了那包括台湾也会就是跟美国参考就是导入这个 VR 系统，因为在美军有很多 VR 系统其实是台湾厂商制造的那他们结合了飞行员的训练，也包括地面部队的战斗训练，都取得很好的效率，所以我想这是未来我们可能看到的一个改革的方向。
So you just heard from Su Tzu-yun from the Institute for National Defense and Security Research about what this arms sales package means for Taiwan's deterrence capability. So Alexander, we are curious how critical it is for the next 5 years for Taiwan, let's say 2027.
Yeah, we have heard 2027 many times for over a year now.
Yes.
You know, it started with the testimony by former Indo-PACOM commander Admiral Phil Davidson. Of course, we all know that why 2027. You know, we have talked about this all along. But the issue is that if we believe that in the next 5 or 10 years that China would acquire the capability of a full-fledged invasion against Taiwan, then we should get prepared, you know, especially prepare for a short-term, you know, requirement.
Okay.
For anyone in uniform or anyone who loved about military affairs, we can always dream of a full range of weapon systems, magic, weapons, platforms that we wanted. But for Taiwan, the survival is number one for now.
But what weapons, Fang-yu, do you think it's the most critical for Taiwan to have? Actually, for both of you.
There are a variety of discussions on what the specific weapon system we need. But I think overall we need to upgrade our warships and fighter jets, and so this kind of upgradation needs a lot of money, right? But I think another important part is the training program. So we are not discussing, for example, the time period of our conscription period, right? But the problem is that we don't have enough personnel, and we don't have the capability to train so many soldiers in the military. So I think it's very important for us to speed up to reform such a training program for the conscription soldiers, as well as our training program for the reservists. So I think all those programs needs a lot of money and needs a lot of resolution to do that immediately.
Yeah, I think budget increase is necessary for the next few years. Let's be clear. We have to swallow it. The key is that when we have limited resources and budget, we need to prioritize. I agree with Fang-yu that we have to think. The United States said that we need to extend our draft, service period from 4 months to a year, and or more. Or the other side is that we need to train better of our reserve and mobilization system. My personal view is that we need to invest on the reservists first, because they have been there, they've been trained before. Yeah, and but for the extension of military service, we need to build new barracks. We need to, find new non-commissioned officers for the extended recruit. So if we are talking about 2027, let's do it. Let's fight with what we have.
I wanted to go back to what Gladys mentioned in terms of what Taiwan needs the most. Because in Washington, there have been voices saying that Taiwan should be stockpiled like Ukraine in terms of long-range or medium-range ballistic missiles. Will that deter China if you feel that the U.S. could send these items so that Beijing can think twice before they actually attack?
Well, if we have better inventory, good amount.
Just something that could hit, say, Beijing or...
Oh, no. I think that will be a tripwire. If the United States... it's a complicated issue, but I have to say that if we focused on, possessing the weapon systems that can deliver directly against the target on the mainland, that will be an invitation of even more swift, military actions against Taiwan. But I think we are both political science professors.
Yeah.
Before talking about weapon systems, I think we need to talk about the thing that we need the most is time. We need to buy time. Everything that we discussed today requires at least 3-5 years to achieve.
And how do we do that? How do we buy time?
Also, we have to be smart.
You talk about manpower, right? The brand, that's what
the
we
manpower
need
is
the most.
another issue. Maybe we should talk in another program, because the low birth rate had already defined that in the next 10-15 years we will definitely have shortage of manpower.
Yes.
Okay, so how to deal with that? By technology, by new weapon systems, smart ideas, or by more service term for compulsory service, or for foreign legend. There are different ways, but before we figure all this out, the threat is coming already. So what we need to do is to focus on the next few years and make sure that Beijing understand that they cannot take Taiwan easily in the next few years, and survival is number one. And then we talk about modernization, development, and innovation.
Okay, Fang-yu, do you have anything to add on considering of this?
Yeah, we have many things to do, but yeah, I agree that we have to prioritize. So for example, to train people, the reservists who have been there. So just to mobilize them and to build up such a mobilization force that is a way to show our determination and signal to China.
So this is a lesson that we took out from Ukraine in the sense that it shows the determination of the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
And that's how they gained international support. Yeah, this is interesting because my next question is actually about how Taiwan seems to have record support now, and especially with Canada, with Trudeau's feud with Xi Jinping over reporters and talking about their private discussion. And just not too long ago, Canada just mentioned that they'll be sending more warships through the Taiwan Strait, and I think France also mentioned the same thing in a meeting with U.S. officials. Do you feel this trend will increase, a move to debunk China's claim that Taiwan waters is actually PRC domestic waters?
I think it's not only Canada, but also for many countries like Germany sent warships to the South China Sea last year, which is the first show in this region in almost 20 years. So I think from the views from the U.S. allies, I think they are indeed more and more likely to sense that the importance of balancing China, because China is kind of threatening the free and open Indo-Pacific. So according to some analysts and the reports that we know that the Taiwan Strait and also the South China Sea is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. So even a minor disruption will cause a very huge impact on the supply chains all over the world. So yeah, so many countries are worried about this, and they are trying to send signals to China that try to stop them from changing the orders in this region. So let me give you a number here. According to Bloomberg, about 48% of world's operational container ships passed through the Taiwan Strait in the first half year of this year. And if we count only the largest tenth of the fleet, then the waterway accounts for about 88% of the traffic. So it is very huge to the world economy. So then more and more countries, not only Canada, Britain, Germany, and so many others are concerned about this region. Also, I think it's also influenced by the U.S. strategy. So U.S. is trying hard to so-called internationalize the Taiwan Strait issues, and it is indeed cooperating with allies to try to deter or to respond to China's ambition in this region.
But speaking of trade, there's also been some disturbing developments, say, from staunch U.S. allies, like as we've seen in Australia. We've seen the Australian Foreign Minister speak with the U.S. Secretary of State, assuring peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, and that Australia will militarily, security, work with the U.S. to maintain that peace. But you also see Prime Minister Albanese talk with Xi Jinping, and there seems to have been a confusion on Taiwan's bid to the TPP. How do you see that, Alex? Do you feel that certain U.S. interests or Taiwan interests could be sacrificed in terms of dealing with China?
I think dealing with China is based on our own, national interests, right? Taiwan is not the only country that needs to deal with China. I used to show people this picture, see how many, president or head of state are trying to deal with China.
This was during G20?
During G20.
Right.
You see?
So many bilateral meeting, private meeting.
Those head of states, they shook hands with Xi Jinping not to diminish or hurt their own national interests. It's to advance their national interests.
But could Taiwan's national interests be jeopardized in that conversation?
I do not believe that they will sell out our national interests. But we need to think hard that why are they engage China, at least for the time being, for what? If they see that it's in their interest to engage with China or maintain communication channels open, it's in their interest, then we must have lessons to learn right?
Yeah, but when we talk about Canada, what's in their mind if we examine it closely?
I think I would recommend you to look at this just released, late November.
Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy.
The Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. They mentioned Taiwan 8 times, but all within a framework that would not antagonize Beijing that much. And 2 out of the 8 occasions there were mentioned about the Aborigine Taiwanese connection with the Southern Pacific Islands. So it's an Indo-Pacific, right? So I think I have many engagement in recent months with Canadian visitors, and I think there is a growing awareness of the China threat, and they wanted to contribute more. I think they are not taking the lead, but they are, watching and working very closely with the United States and follow their steps. So I do not see any problem I would not be surprised that Canada will send their Navy ships, to sail the Taiwan Strait, which everyone knows that by the law of the sea, that Taiwan Strait is, defined as a waterway for freedom of navigation.
But in your conversations, what has brought about this realization? Is it because of domestic politics that China has been meddling in, or is it because
No, I think it's a general sense that the Western democracies would have to work together to deal with a rising China and unpredictable regime in Beijing. I think that's a general consensus. So democracies should work together, especially after Ukraine. People believe that instead of responding to a crisis, probably it's better to prevent a crisis before it happens. So we are a little bit benefit from the Ukraine crisis, and because the world, especially Western democracies, there is a rising situation awareness.
At least it makes the world talks about Taiwan and also Taiwan Strait.
Right.
So Fang-yu, from your time in Washington, D.C., any overseas Taiwanese or Chinese talk about this type of issues that you can share with us?
Well, I witnessed the huge change. We call a paradigm shift from when I was there. I was there from 2015 to 2020. Right. So there's a considerable change of the atmosphere there. So before about 2017, I think most of people still think that China is going to liberalize someday, and we still believe in the globalization era that everyone can do business very good and maintain a very good relationship with each other. But after President Trump took power, the atmosphere just started to change because his administration rapidly changed people's perception, and people started to know that, okay, so there's a lot of things going on, like the economic espionage and also some other kinds of militarization of the South China Sea. And so many issues that people started to know that, okay, so there's a dangerous sign that China is going to become very dangerous for the world order. And after 2018, when Xi Jinping abolished the term limits, right. and then everybody just realized, okay, so it's not, the Chinese liberalization is not going to happen. So there's a very big change for the policy there.
We just discussed how Taiwan and the U.S., alongside its democratic allies, is working together on regional security to deter China from an invasion. Coming up, we will be discussing how Taiwan can best navigate through the next 5 years of Chinese aggression, as support for Taiwan from the U.S. and the international community is at an all-time high.
So in this episode, we have two guests with us in the studio. First, we have Alexander Huang. So he's now KMT's International Affairs Director and representative to the U.S. Also, we have Assistant Professor of Political Science at Soochow University. So we have two guests joining us to discuss what the next 5 years could potentially look like for the country as Taiwan navigates through Xi's third term and increased U.S. and international support for Taiwan as it intensifies its competition with China. So this question goes to Alex. So we've discussed about how intensified we feel right now on the island in Taiwan for the coming years. So we also talk about the coming presidential election. Do you see that this will be the huge debate within the next election?
Based on our discussion so far,
Right.
I think the next president,
have a tough job?
service term between 2024 to 28, will have a mounting challenge, a growing challenge, because the next president's term will have to navigate through the conclusion of Xi Jinping's third term.
Or actually, we don't know yet, right? If it will be the last term
It
for
could be
him or
less.
not, right?
Fourth term.
Or the centennial or 100 years anniversary of the
At
People's
least critical
Liberation Army.
period. Yeah.
So those are the critical years. So how can we do it? As we say that we need to work together with our friends, partners with democratic institutions, but we also need to be very vigilant to make sure that Taiwan has our own assessment of the security threat. Of course, every country can look at the Taiwan area and make their own judgment and issue strategy paper. But the reality is that where is our own strategy paper? Where is our own national security strategy? We haven't had one yet. So I think for people who want to run for the next presidency, or his followers, supporters, or campaign staffers, national security advisors, you got probably less than 10 months to think through about all this and wrote it out so the voters can see in Taiwan and our partners overseas can see where are you going. I think this is a tough job, but we have to do it. So I would say that how can we navigate through the next 5 years, depending on who will be our next president and who will be the next government, and how they deal with both Washington and Beijing.
Just to follow up on that, Fang-yu, do you feel that China would do something as they did in the 2020 election, prop up something that either candidate could perhaps use in Taiwan's national election discourse?
It's hard to say.
With Hong Kong.
Yeah, it's very hard to say because one of the characteristics of the authoritarian regime is that it's highly unpredictable. So we don't know what they will do. We don't know what is next. So for example, in recent days, we know that China is having some latest sanction on Taiwanese products, including some agricultural products and others. So they use these kind of sanctions in a very unpredictable way. So we don't know what is the next. So, but we know that their threat is always there, and they are pushing forward for a new plan for unification. That is starting from 2019, right? As Xi Jinping delivered the speech to Taiwanese people, that he claims that he's going to push up for the new Taiwan plan for the one country, two system. And then we see the 20th Party Congress report this year that they clearly define that they are going to continue the work and then to push for a plan for unification, negotiation, and something like that.
So based on what you have seen, you feel that China has actually moved away from just being anti-independence. They're actually pushing for active reunification, or what they call as reunification?
I think they have a plan for this. Also, for example, you can see our celebrities, our actors and singers there. So their articles and their dialogue on the Facebook and some social media, they show more. We can see that China demands them to see
with their national day and all.
Yeah. So this is kind of a common phenomenon that they are pushing for unification. But actually, the real policy is more than the celebrities, right? So they are pushing for more unification efforts, like funding for the local groups and invitation of some politicians to negotiate something. In China, something like that.
It's interesting what Fang-yu mentioned. Alex, since your party, the KMT, has actually had more of a communication line with China, do you feel that sentiment has actually changed from the CCP's perspective? Are they now actually actively pursuing reunification on their terms?
You don't need to have a communication line to learn that, because from open source, they talk about it. Especially after the party congress in November, they, shift gear from anti-independence.
So you're saying it's very obvious
to promote unification. Our challenge right now is that how to slow down or to dissuade their approach or their objectives. How to deal with that? Of course, one way is to work with all partners in democracies. But on the other hand is to have our own assessment and judgment and our own mainland China policy that is smart enough to make sure that they would not go for military options or coercive measures against Taiwan. And that's why my party continued to promote that in addition to business exchange, we wanted to, especially after the COVID, we want to have religious exchange, we want to have cultural exchange, we want to have educational exchange, student exchange, to rebuild some kind of base for a non-hostile foundation.
Like a basic red line.
Yeah, across the Taiwan Strait from people to people level. And of course, I don't think that blue or green really like to poke the bear on the daily basis, right? Yet better, if you have a line, then you can call them and say, hey, shut up. This is not right. You can express your view and feeling directly to your adversary, rather than using keyboards.
I would like to go back to the future potential candidates in coming years for Taiwan. Actually, do you see any potential opportunities for them to strike a balance without having to see as too hostile or selling out Taiwan's national interest for both of you, actually?